The granite was cold under his fingertips, a stark contrast to the memory of Clara's hand in his. Leo traced the letters of her name, etched deep into the polished stone. Clara Marie Vance, beloved wife. A year had passed since the day the world had shattered, a year of walking through a fog of grief so thick he could barely breathe. The cemetery was quiet, a hushed reverence hanging in the crisp autumn air. The leaves on the old oak trees had turned to brilliant shades of gold and crimson, a beautiful, cruel reminder that life moved on, even when his had stopped. He had come here every week for 52 weeks. It was a ritual, a penance, a desperate attempt to feel close to her, to understand the void she had left behind. A sharp, condescending cough cut through the silence like a blade. Leo didn't need to turn around. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his mother-in-law, Beatrice, a woman who had mastered the art of expressing disappointment with a single exhalation. "Still here, Leo?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, but it had an edge of polished steel. "Don't you think Clara would want you to move on?" He slowly stood up, brushing the dirt from the knees of his worn jeans. He faced her. Beatrice stood there, immaculate in a black cashmere coat, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside her, her son Julian smirked, looking bored and superior, in a designer suit that probably cost more than Leo's car. "I just wanted to be here," Leo said, his voice quiet. "It's the anniversary." Beatrice's lips thinned into a line of pity. It was a look he knew well, one that made him feel small and inadequate. "Of course. A year. It's been so hard on us, losing our girl." She emphasized "our girl," a subtle, vicious reminder that he was, and always would be, an outsider. He was just the man Clara had married, not family. Not really. Julian stepped forward, pulling a pair of leather gloves on with a little snap. "Mother's right, Leo. Moping around here isn't doing anyone any good. Clara had so much life in her. It's a shame her final years were, well, you know." The insinuation was clear. It was a theme they had played on a loop since the funeral. Clara's unhappiness, her restlessness, had been his fault. He hadn't been enough, not rich enough, not sophisticated enough, not ambitious enough. He had given her everything he had. He had worked 2 jobs, renovated their house with his own hands, loved her with a quiet, steady devotion that he thought was the bedrock of their lives. But to her family, he was just the blue-collar carpenter who had somehow tricked their princess into marriage. "She was my wife," Leo said, a flicker of defiance in his tone. Beatrice let out a sigh that sounded like weeping, but her eyes were dry and cold. "And she deserved the world, Leo. We all know that. She was destined for such great things before him." That was the unspoken word hanging in the air. They stood in a triangle of resentment and grief, the tombstone a silent judge between them. Leo felt the familiar wave of exhaustion wash over him. Arguing with them was pointless. It was like throwing stones at a fortress. It was then that he saw her. A woman was walking slowly up the manicured path. She was hesitant, her steps uncertain as if she were trespassing. She held the hand of a small boy who looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. Leo's first thought was that they were lost, looking for another grave. But they stopped a respectful distance away, their eyes fixed on Clara's headstone. Beatrice noticed them a moment later. Her face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private moment." The woman flinched, but held her ground. She had dark hair and kind, sad eyes. She looked tired. "I'm sorry," she whispered. We wanted to pay our respects." Julian sneered. "Pay respects? Who are you? Some friend of hers we never had the misfortune of meeting?" The woman didn't answer. She just looked at Leo, a strange, searching expression on her face. But it wasn't her that held Leo's gaze. It was the boy. He had dark, curly hair that fell over his forehead. He had a serious little face, a small, determined chin, and wide brown eyes that were staring right at Leo. It was like looking into a mirror, a small, blurry childhood mirror, the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. It was Leo's face, shrunk down and placed on a child. The resemblance was uncanny, immediate, and utterly shocking. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, pierced through the fog of his grief. His heart started to pound against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "Who is that child?" Leo asked, his voice barely a croak. Beatrice followed his gaze, and her own eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, horrified disgust. "My God!" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "What is this sordid little spectacle?" She marched toward the woman. "You need to leave. Now. Take that child and get out of here. You have no right to disturb our family's grief." The little boy shrank behind the woman's legs, his big, familiar eyes welling up with tears. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Elena, just shook her head. She looked at Leo again, her expression pleading. "I had to," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a promise." Julian stepped between them, puffing out his chest. "You heard my mother. Get lost before I call security. We don't want your kind here." Leo couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at the boy, at his own face staring back at him. 1,000 questions, all sharp and painful, exploded in his mind. Who was he? Why was he here? And why did looking at him feel like a key turning in a lock he never knew existed? The world, which had already shattered once, was beginning to crack all over again. The memory of that little boy's face became a brand on Leo's mind. For days he saw it everywhere. In the reflection of a shop window, in the face of a stranger's child at the grocery store, and most of all, in the darkness behind his own eyelids when he tried to sleep. His marriage to Clara had been a complicated tapestry. He remembered the beginning, the dizzying, brilliant days when her laughter filled their small apartment. She had been drawn to what she called his stillness, his steadiness. He was a rock, she'd said, in the turbulent sea of her life. He was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands. He found satisfaction in the clean lines of a well-made joint, in the scent of sawdust, in the solid weight of a finished piece. Clara had been his opposite, effervescent, ambitious, always reaching for something just beyond her grasp. Her family, Beatrice and Julian, had never approved. They saw him as a temporary project for Clara, a rustic phase she was going through. Their condescension had been a constant, low hum in the background of his life. At family dinners, they would ask him about his little projects with thinly veiled amusement, their eyes glazing over when he tried to explain the intricacies of his work. He had ignored them, focusing on Clara. He loved her. He believed his love was enough to build a world for them. He bought a dilapidated old house on the edge of town and poured his soul into it. He spent every spare hour restoring it, sanding floors, rebuilding walls, crafting cabinets. It was a home he built for her, a testament to his devotion. But as the years went on, something shifted. Clara grew distant. Her laughter became rare, replaced by a brittle impatience. She started spending more time with her family, going on shopping trips he knew they couldn't afford, attending society events where he felt clumsy and out of place. "You don't understand, Leo," she would say, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's important to be seen, to make connections." He tried to understand. He took on more work, long hours that left him exhausted, his hands raw. He thought if he could just provide more, give her the lifestyle she seemed to crave, she would be happy again. He thought her coldness was a symptom of her unhappiness with their circumstances. He never imagined it was a symptom of her unhappiness with him. Her death in a car accident had been sudden, a brutal, senseless end. The police said she lost control on a wet road. He was left with a half-finished kitchen renovation and a silence in the house that was deafening. Beatrice and Julian's grief had quickly curdled into blame. At the funeral, Beatrice had pulled him aside, her fingers digging into his arm. "This is your fault," she'd hissed, her face a mask of tragedy and rage. "You dragged her down, you clipped her wings, she was miserable with you, and it made her careless." The words had been a physical blow. He had stumbled away, the weight of her accusation adding to his already unbearable sorrow. He believed her. For a year he had carried that guilt, a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off. Now the image of that boy had introduced a new, terrifying variable into the equation of his grief. He had to find her. He had to find that woman, Elena. He spent 2 days driving back and forth to the cemetery, hoping she would return. He sat in his truck, watching, waiting. On the 3rd day, he saw her. She was alone this time, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers on Clara's grave. Leo got out of his truck and approached her slowly, his heart hammering. "Please," he said, his voice rough, "don't run." "I just need to talk to you." Elena jumped, startled. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "I shouldn't be here." "The boy," Leo said, getting straight to the point. "Who is he?" Elena wrung her hands, her gaze darting around as if expecting Beatrice to appear from behind a tombstone. "His name is Sam. I can't say more." "He looks like me," Leo said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "You have to tell me why?" A tear rolled down Elena's cheek. She looked genuinely distressed. "Clara, she made me promise. She was my friend. Or, I thought she was." "What did she make you promise?" Leo pressed, taking a step closer. "She gave me things for safekeeping," Elena whispered. "She said if anything ever happened to her, I was to bring Sam here on the anniversary. She said you'd know what to do." "I don't know what to do," Leo's voice cracked with desperation. "I don't know anything. Who is his mother? Is it you?" Eleanor shook her head vehemently. No, he's not mine. His mother, her name is Maria. Clara knew her. She was helping her out." The story felt thin, incomplete. Helping her out? Why? And why did the boy look so much like him? It was a cruel coincidence that felt too pointed to be random. "Clara left something else for you," Elena said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small, ornate wooden box. It was dark, polished wood, with a small, tarnished silver lock. "She told me to give this to you, but only if you started asking the right questions." She pushed the box into his hands. It was heavier than it looked. "I don't know what's inside," Eleanor said quickly. "I don't want to know. Clara—" She had secrets, Leo, lots of them. I think she was scared. The last few weeks before she died, she was different, panicked. Leo stared at the box. It felt like a grenade in his hands, the pin already pulled. Before he could ask another question, Elena turned and practically ran, disappearing down the path and out of the cemetery gates, leaving Leo alone with the cold granite, the falling leaves, and a box full of secrets. He returned to the house he had built for Clara, the silence pressing in on him. That evening, the phone rang. It was Julian. "Leo," he said, his tone slick and condescending. "Mother and I have been talking. We've decided it's time to sell the house." Leo's blood ran cold. "What? This is my home." "Technically, it was Clara's," Julian said smoothly. "Her name is on the deed, and since she had no will, her assets revert to her next of kin. That's us. We've already spoken to a realtor." It was true. In his blind devotion, Leo had put everything in her name, believing it was a gesture of trust. He never thought to question it. "We're prepared to be generous, of course," Julian continued, the false magnanimity thick in his voice. "We'll give you a small percentage of the sale, enough for you to find a little apartment somewhere. Consider it a thank you for, taking care of things." They were kicking him out. They were throwing him out of the home he had poured his blood and sweat into, and they were talking about it like they were doing him a favor. The arrogance, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it was breathtaking. "You can't do this," Leo said, his voice shaking with a rage he hadn't felt in years. Julian chuckled. "Oh, I think we can. The law is on our side. The realtor will be by next week to assess the property. I'd advise you to start packing." The line went dead. Leo stood in the middle of his living room, the silent house mocking him. He was losing everything: his wife, his home, his past. He looked down at the wooden box in his hand. Elena's words echoed in his head. She had secrets, Leo. Lots of them. With a surge of desperate resolve, he went to his workshop, found a small chisel and a hammer, and set about opening the box. He didn't care about damaging it. He only cared about the truth. The lock on the box was old and stubborn, but Leo's hands were skilled. With a sharp crack, the wood splintered and the lid popped open. He had expected letters, maybe a diary, something personal, emotional. What he found was cold and impersonal. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, heavy brass key. It was ornate, with a complex star-shaped head. Tucked beside it was a crisp, cream-coloured business card. The card read, "Thompson and Sterling, LLP, Arthur Thompson, Senior Partner." Below the name was an address in the city's most exclusive financial district and a private phone number. There was nothing else, no note, no explanation, just a key and a lawyer's card. For 2 days, Leo stared at the items, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. What did it mean? Why would Clara leave him this? Was this another one of her games, another secret he was never meant to understand? The impending loss of his home, the final brutal insult from Beatrice and Julian, hardened his resolve. He had nothing left to lose. He had to know. He called the number on the card. A polite, professional secretary answered. When he gave his name, her tone shifted immediately. "Mr. Vance." "Yes, Mr. Thompson has been expecting you might call. Can you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m.? The next morning, Leo put on his best shirt, the one he wore to weddings and funerals. He drove his old pickup truck into the city, the gleaming skyscrapers feeling like an alien landscape. The law office of Thompson and Sterling occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower that scraped the sky. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and polished steel. Men and women in sharp suits moved with a quiet, predatory confidence. Leo felt clumsy and out of place, his work boots silent on the plush carpet. He was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. A man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and shrewd, intelligent eyes, stood to greet him. This was Arthur Thompson. "Mr. Vance," he said, his handshake firm, "thank you for coming. Please, sit." Leo sat in a leather chair that was softer than his bed. He placed the brass key on the massive mahogany desk between them. "My wife, Clara, she left me this. I don't understand." Mr. Thompson picked up the key, turning it over in his fingers. "I know. I was her legal counsel. More accurately, I was the counsel for the estate she was managing, or, as it turns out, mismanaging." The lawyer leaned back, his expression turning grave. "Mr. Vance, Leo, What I am about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. I want you to prepare yourself. Leo's hands clenched in his lap. Just tell me. First, Mr. Thompson began, your wife's family, the Devlins, their wealth, the mansion, the cars, the society parties. It was all a facade. They were deeply in debt 20 years ago. Their family fortune was a memory. Leo frowned. But their inheritance? Clara always talked about her family's money. A fiction, the lawyer said flatly. A carefully constructed lie they told the world, and one you were meant to believe. He paused, letting the information sink in. Leo, do you know much about your own family? Your paternal grandfather, for instance? Jonathan Vance. Leo shook his head. Not much. He and my father were estranged. I met him once when I was a kid. He was a quiet, stern man. I think he worked in oil or something. He died years ago. Mr. Thompson gave a grim smile. Jonathan Vance did more than work in oil. He was a pioneer in offshore drilling technology. He was a brilliant, reclusive, and extraordinarily wealthy man. When he died, he left the entirety of his fortune, a portfolio of assets and investments currently valued at over $300 million, in a blind trust. Leo stared at him, uncomprehending. 300 million. The number was so vast it was meaningless. What does that have to do with me? He left it to you, Leo, the lawyer said, his voice soft. You were his sole heir. The trust was structured to become accessible to you on your 30th birthday. Until then, it was to be managed by a trustee. The room began to spin. Me? But that's impossible. I never received anything. That, Mr. Thompson said, his eyes hardening, is where your wife comes in? He opened a thick file on his desk. Somehow, Clara found out about the trust. We believe she discovered it through a junior clerk at the bank who was a friend of her brother's. This was before you were married, before she even showed any serious interest in you. The lawyer's words were like hammer blows, each one restructuring the entire history of Leo's life. She didn't marry you for love, Leo. She married you for access. Her family, the Devlins, concocted a scheme. It was audacious. It was cruel. And for 7 years it was successful. He explained the mechanism. Clara had come to him posing as Leo's concerned fiancé. She claimed Leo was a simple man, easily overwhelmed, and that he wanted her to manage his financial affairs. They had forged Leo's signature on a power of attorney document. It was a masterful forgery, good enough to fool the bank and the trust administrators. With that document, Clara became the de facto controller of a $300 million fortune. She never touched the principal, Thompson explained. She was too smart for that. But she set up a series of shell corporations. She would have the trust invest in these companies, then siphon off the profits. That is what funded her lifestyle, her shopping sprees, her cars, her allowance to her mother and brother. It all came from your money. Leo felt sick. The condescension, the pitying looks, the whispers about how he couldn't provide for her. All of it had been a lie, a performance to cover the greatest theft he could possibly imagine. They weren't just looking down on him, they were robbing him blind and mocking him for being poor. The house, Leo whispered. Bought with your money, Thompson confirmed. Put in her name to solidify her control. Everything they have, everything they flaunt, is yours. Their entire world is built on a foundation of your stolen wealth. The air in the room was thick and heavy. Leo couldn't breathe. He thought about Clara's coldness, her distance. It wasn't because he had failed her. It was because he was her mark, her victim. His love had been nothing more than a tool for her greed. But why did she leave me the key? Leo asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Because she was planning to run, Thompson said. This key opens a safe deposit box in Geneva. Inside is a significant amount of bearer bonds and untraceable assets. It was her escape plan. She was going to drain a final, massive amount from the trust, fake her death, and disappear. The car accident wasn't an accident, not in the way you think. Our forensic accountants believe she was in a hurry, overloaded with cash she had just withdrawn. She was being reckless because she was on her way to a private airfield to meet someone. She simply made a fatal error, a miscalculation in her grand plan. The final, most painful piece was yet to come. "There's one more thing, Leo," the lawyer said, his expression softening with genuine pity. "The child at the cemetery. Sam." Leo braced himself. "The story about Clara's lover is a misdirection, one she likely planted herself. The truth is more direct and far crueler. Before you met Clara, you had a brief relationship with a woman named Maria Flores, correct?" Leo's mind flashed back. Maria. A sweet, kind waitress he had dated for a few months nearly 6 years ago. It had ended amicably when she moved away to care for her sick mother. "Yes, I remember her. She was pregnant when she left, Leo, with your child. She tried to contact you, but by then you were with Clara. Clara intercepted her letters. She found Maria, who was alone and struggling, and she made her an offer." The lawyer's voice was grim. "Clara offered to support her and the child financially, to give them a good life. The only condition was that Maria was never, ever to contact you. She was to disappear from your life forever. Clara used your own money to pay her to stay away, to keep your own son a secret from you." The world went white. The noise of the city outside faded into a dull roar. His son. That little boy was not a coincidence. He was not a stranger. He was his son. Clara hadn't just stolen his money and his dignity. She had stolen his child. She had kept him from his own flesh and blood, using the boy as another pawn in her twisted game, another secret to be managed. The cruelty of it was absolute, a black hole that consumed every good memory he had of her. Mr. Thompson slid a document across the desk. "This document revokes Clara's forged power of attorney and grants our firm the authority to act on your behalf. We can begin the process of reclaiming every single stolen asset. We can initiate federal fraud charges against Beatrice and Julian Devlin. We can dismantle their entire world legally and systematically." He slid a pen next to the document. "The choice, Leo, is yours." For a long moment, Leo just stared at the document. The crisp white paper, the stark black ink. It was more than a legal form. It was a declaration of war. The grief that had clouded his world for a year evaporated, burned away by the white-hot furnace of a rage so pure and cold it was almost serene. The man who had walked into this office an hour ago, the grieving widower, the humble carpenter, the victim, was gone. In his place sat someone else, someone harder, sharper. He remembered every condescending remark from Beatrice, every sneering dismissal from Julian. He remembered the pity in their eyes as they stood over his wife's grave, blaming him for her unhappiness while they lived like kings on his stolen fortune. He thought of Clara, the woman he had loved, the woman he had mourned. That woman never existed. She was a fiction, a mask worn by a thief. The love he had felt was real, but it had been directed at a ghost. The real Clara had been counting his money behind his back. And then he thought of Sam, his son. A little boy with his own eyes kept from him by a monstrous, calculated deception. A whole life he had missed. First steps, first words, scraped knees, bedtime stories, all of it stolen. That was the thought that broke the dam. It wasn't about the money, it was about his son. Leo picked up the pen. The plastic was cool and smooth in his hand. He looked at Mr. Thompson, his eyes clear and steady. There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Let's begin," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He signed his name. The stroke of the pen was firm, decisive. With that simple act, a sleeping giant awoke. Mr. Thompson nodded, a grimly satisfied look on his face. He took the signed paper. "Excellent. Now let's discuss the strategy." They spent the next hour in what felt like a war room. Mr. Thompson, the seasoned general, laid out the battlefield. He explained that Beatrice and Julian were arrogant, but not stupid. They had layers of protection, but they were all built on the single, flawed foundation of Clara's fraudulent control. "The key is to not attack them head-on, not at first," the lawyer explained, pointing to a complex chart of shell corporations. "A direct lawsuit would give them time to hide assets, to destroy evidence. We need to create a cascade failure. We will pull one thread, and their entire tapestry will unravel." The plan was elegant in its viciousness. It was designed to use their own greed and arrogance against them. "Step 1, Thompson said, is an anonymous tip. I have a contact at the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. We will provide them with the account numbers for the primary shell corporation, Devlin Holdings, and suggest they look into irregularities regarding its declared income versus its expenditures. An audit of this magnitude will freeze their primary cash flow immediately." Leo nodded, a cold smile touching his lips for the first time. "They pay for everything with that account." "Precisely," Thompson agreed. "Step 2 targets their lifestyle. The mansion Beatrice lives in is mortgaged to the hilt. The loan, however, isn't held by her but by another shell company, collateralized against assets in your trust. We will inform the bank that the collateral is fraudulent and has been revoked. They will have no choice but to call in the entire loan immediately. Julian's flashy job, his expense account, the luxury cars, they were all tied into this web. The plan was to surgically cut each thread one by one. They will panic, Thompson predicted. They will try to liquidate assets, call in favors, but the walls will already be closing in. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. Their social circle will abandon them the moment the money dries up. In their world, financial ruin is a communicable disease. The final part of the plan was the most important to Leo. "And my son?" he asked, his voice tight. "We've already engaged a private investigator," Thompson said gently. "We have an address for Maria Flores and her son. She's living in a small town a few states away. The payments from Clara stopped the day she died, of course. Our investigator reports she is struggling, working 2 jobs. Once we have secured your primary assets, your first act will be to take care of them, and we will help you establish your paternity legally." Leo leaned back in the chair, the scale of it all settling over him. It was a complete and total reversal of fortune. He was no longer the powerless victim. He was the architect of their downfall. He held all the cards. "They will come to you when they get desperate," Thompson warned. "They will beg, threaten, and try to manipulate you. You must be prepared for that." "I'm prepared," Leo said, and he knew it was true. The man they thought they knew, the quiet, accommodating carpenter, was a persona they had helped create. They had no idea who they were dealing with now. As he left the gleaming office tower and walked back to his old truck, the city didn't seem so alien anymore. It seemed like a kingdom, and he had just been handed the keys. He drove home, the plan replaying in his mind. It was a masterpiece of legal destruction. That afternoon, from a secure, encrypted line in his office, Mr. Thompson made a single phone call to a contact in Washington, D.C. He spoke for less than 5 minutes. The first domino had been pushed. The cascade was about to begin. Leo sat in the quiet of his home, the home they were trying to take from him. And for the first time in a year, he waited not with dread, but with anticipation. The first sign of the collapse came 4 days later. It arrived in a crisp priority mail envelope at Beatrice Devlin's sprawling mansion. Inside was a letter from the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. It was not a request. It was a notification. It informed her that her primary financial entity, Devlin Holdings, was under a full forensic audit for suspected tax fraud and money laundering. All associated accounts were frozen, effective immediately. Beatrice read the letter once, then twice, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. The river of money that had fueled her entire existence had just been dammed. Her first call was to Julian. He was in a board meeting presenting a project he had lavishly funded with money siphoned from the family's slush fund. "We have a problem," Beatrice said, her voice a high-pitched shriek of panic. "A big one. The IRS. They've frozen everything." Julian, ever arrogant, tried to calm her down. "It's a mistake, Mother, a clerical error. I'll have my lawyer sort it out." But when he called his lawyer, the man was suddenly distant and evasive. "An IRS criminal probe is serious, Julian. I'm not sure I have the expertise for this. You'll need a specialized tax attorney." It was the first of many doors that would be politely, but firmly, shut in his face. The second domino fell the very next day. A vice president from the bank that held the mortgage on Beatrice's mansion called. The conversation was brief and brutal. The collateral backing her multi-million-dollar loan had been deemed invalid. As per the terms of the agreement, the entire balance of the loan was due, in full, immediately. "That's impossible!" Beatrice screamed into the phone. "I have a payment schedule." "The terms were clear, Madam Devlin," the banker replied, his voice like ice. "Payment is due within 24 hours, or we will initiate foreclosure proceedings." Panic gave way to frantic, desperate action. Julian tried to arrange a bridge loan, but with their primary accounts frozen and whispers of an IRS investigation starting to circulate, no one would touch them. Their credit, once limitless, was now toxic. They tried to move personal funds only to discover how little they actually had. Everything, the house, the art on the walls, the jewelry in Beatrice's safe, was leveraged, bought with money that was no longer theirs. They were living in a house of cards, and a hurricane had just hit. From his quiet home, Leo watched the storm from a distance. Mr. Thompson provided him with daily updates, a calm voice narrating the systematic demolition of the Devlin Empire. Then the phone call he had been waiting for came. It was Beatrice. Her voice, usually so controlled and imperious, was ragged with desperation. "Leo," she began, attempting a tone of strained familiarity. "We have a bit of a cash flow problem, just a temporary banking mix-up. I was wondering if you might be able to help us out, a small loan just to tide us over." Leo leaned back in his chair, a cold, satisfying calm washing over him. He savored the moment. "A loan, Beatrice? I don't know. You know I don't have that kind of money. I'm just a carpenter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the frustration warring with her desperation. "Don't be difficult, Leo," she snapped, her mask slipping. "Even you must have some savings. This is for the family." "My family?" Leo asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I thought my only family was Clara, and she's gone." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "We need $20,000, Leo. It's a matter of great urgency." $20,000, Leo repeated slowly, as if the number were impossibly large. "Beatrice, that's more than I make in half a year. I'm sorry, I wish I could help." He hung up the phone, the click of the receiver sounding like a gavel. The cascade accelerated. Julian was suspended from his job, pending an investigation into financial improprieties on his expense reports. The real reason, as everyone in their social circle knew, was that the Devlin name had suddenly become poison. 2 days later, a flatbed truck arrived at Beatrice's mansion and towed away her prized Bentley. The next day, another came for Julian's sports car. Their credit cards were declined at the high-end restaurants they used to frequent. Invitations to galas and charity balls mysteriously stopped arriving. They were being socially and financially exiled, a process that was as swift as it was brutal. Their friends, the ones they had cultivated for years with expensive dinners and lavish gifts, now crossed the street to avoid them. Julian called next. His tone was not pleading, but demanding. "Leo, stop playing games!" he spat. "Mother told me you refused to help. You owe us. Clara would be disgusted with you." "Clara is the reason I have nothing to give you, Julian," Leo replied, the double meaning lost on the arrogant man. "Listen to me, you pathetic little man," Julian snarled. "We are selling the house. The realtor is coming tomorrow, and you will be out by the end of the month. That house is the only thing we have left, and we are taking it. You will get nothing." This was the moment Leo had been preparing for. "The realtor can come," he said calmly, "but you might want to check the county records again. The ownership of this property was updated this morning." A confused silence. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that this house is, and always has been, legally mine," Leo said. "The funds used to purchase it were stolen from me, and I have reclaimed them, and the house along with it." "You have no claim to it, Julian. None at all." "You're lying," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "You're a broke nobody carpenter. You couldn't afford a shed, let alone this house." "Things change," Leo said, and hung up the phone. He sat in his kitchen, the one he had been in the middle of renovating for Clara. He looked at his own 2 hands. They were calloused and strong. They were hands that built things. For 7 years, he had used them to build a life for a woman who despised him, to unwittingly fund the lavish lives of the people who looked down on him. Now he had used his mind, and the power that was rightfully his, to unbuild their world. And he was not finished yet. The final confrontation was coming. He knew they would come to him, to the house they thought was their last salvation. And he would be ready. They came at dusk. Not in a luxury car, but in a taxi that sped away as soon as they were on the curb, as if afraid of being associated with them. Beatrice and Julian walked up the stone path that Leo had laid himself. They looked ravaged. Beatrice's perfect hair was askew, and she wore the same cashmere coat she'd worn at the cemetery, but it now looked rumpled and stained. Julian's suit was wrinkled, his face pale and unshaven. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, feral desperation. Leo watched them approach from the living room window. He had sent Maria and his son, Sam, to a comfortable hotel for the evening with one of Mr. Thompson's security staff. He had met them 3 days ago, a reunion so emotionally charged it had left him breathless. Seeing Sam, knowing the boy was his, had solidified his resolve into something as hard and unbreakable as diamond. This had to be finished. He opened the door before they could knock. They pushed past him into the foyer, their eyes scanning the house with a proprietary hunger. "We need to talk," Beatrice said, her voice raspy. She had shed all pretense of politeness. "There's nothing to talk about," Leo replied, closing the door behind them. He remained calm, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He was in control. "Don't you dare take that tone with me," Julian snarled, pointing a trembling finger at him. What did you do? What did you tell them? Tell who? Leo asked, feigning ignorance. The banks, the IRS, everyone. Beatrice shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. Our lives are ruined. Everything is gone. This house is all we have left. This house was never yours, Leo said simply. They stared at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and fury. They still didn't understand. They still saw him as the simple carpenter, the fool they had played for years. It was time to pull back the curtain. You know, Leo began, his voice conversational, as he walked into the living room he had built. For 7 years I broke my back for her. I worked until my hands bled to give Clara the life I thought she wanted. And all that time, you two looked at me like I was something you'd scraped off your shoe. He turned to face them. You pitied me. You mocked my job. You told me and everyone else that I wasn't good enough for her, that I was dragging her down. You were, Julian spat. She was miserable. Oh, she was miserable, Leo agreed, a humorless smile on his face. But not for the reasons you think. It must be exhausting pretending to love someone while you're systematically robbing them. The colour drained from their faces. You spent 7 years treating me like I was worthless, Leo continued, his voice dropping, each word a carefully placed stone. What you didn't know was that every dollar you ever spent was mine. Every designer dress Beatrice bought, every bottle of champagne Julian popped, every lavish vacation, every catered party. I paid for all of it. Beatrice shook her head, a gesture of frantic denial. You're insane. You're making this up. Am I? Leo said. He walked over to a bookshelf and picked up a framed photo of his father and a stern-looking older man. Do you know who this is, Beatrice? This is Jonathan Vance, my grandfather, a man who left his entire fortune, over $300 million, to me. He let the number hang in the air, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to dawning, sickening horror. Clara found out, Leo said, his voice now like ice. She didn't marry me, she acquired me like an asset, and with her clever, greedy family, she forged my signature and spent 7 years siphoning my inheritance to fund your pathetic, fraudulent lives. He laid it all out. The trust fund, the shell corporations, the forged documents. He recited account numbers and company names that Mr. Thompson had drilled into him. The evidence was irrefutable, and the knowledge was his. Devlin Holdings, he said, looking directly at Beatrice. Your personal piggy bank, funded by the Vance Prosperity Trust, my trust. Beatrice staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian just stared, his jaw slack. The entire foundation of their world had just been revealed as a lie, and the man they had despised as a pauper was, in fact, their unwitting king. But that wasn't the worst of it, Leo said, his voice trembling with a tightly controlled rage. Money's just money. You can't steal what's most important. He paused, letting them stew in their terror. She stole my son. Beatrice looked utterly baffled. Son? You don't have a son? Oh, but I do, Leo said. His name is Sam. He has my eyes. Clara found out about him 6 years ago. She found his mother, a woman I once knew, and she paid her to disappear. She used my money to buy my son's absence from my life. She kept him from me. He took a step toward them, and for the first time they flinched back from him. They were afraid. You didn't just live on my money, he hissed. You lived on my life. You feasted on it, and you complained about the taste. Beatrice finally broke. A terrible, guttural sob escaped her lips. No, no, Clara wouldn't. She loved us. She loved money, Leo corrected her coldly. And you were the beneficiaries. But the bank is closed. The accounts are settled. Julian, seeing his entire world in ashes, lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was the blind, stupid rage of a cornered animal. "You will pay for this," he screamed, his hands reaching for Leo's throat. He never made it. The front door burst open and two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their expressions grim. Behind them stood Arthur Thompson, holding a file. Julian froze, his hands in the air. Beatrice let out a piercing scream. "Beatrice Devlin? Julian Devlin?" one of the officers said, his voice booming in the sudden silence. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." As the officers moved forward, cuffing a sobbing Beatrice and a stunned, defeated Julian, Leo met Mr. Thompson's gaze. The lawyer gave a single, slow nod. Justice. Leo watched as they were led out of his house, their desperate protests and weeping pleas echoing in the night air. They were escorted past the stone path he had laid, past the garden he had tended, and put into the back of a police car. He stood in the doorway of his home, the cool night air on his face. The noise faded. The drama was over. All that was left was a profound, echoing silence. He had won. He had taken back his life. He had avenged the theft of his past and secured his future. And as he closed the door, he thought only of one thing. His son, sleeping safely in a hotel room, waiting for his father to come and take him home. The downfall of the Devlin family was as swift and public as their reign had been arrogant and private. The trial was a brief, sensational affair that was mercilessly covered by the same society pages that had once chronicled their every party. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence meticulously compiled by Mr. Thompson's firm, Beatrice and Julian had no defense. Their lawyers advised them to plead guilty. The judge was not lenient. He spoke of the breathtaking scope of their greed and the profound cruelty of their deception. Beatrice, stripped of her finery and her pride, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Julian received 10. They were ordered to pay restitution, a meaningless gesture as they were utterly bankrupt. Every asset, every hidden account, every piece of jewelry had been seized and returned to its rightful owner. They were led from the courtroom in handcuffs, their faces pale and drawn. The last image Leo saw of his mother-in-law was of her staring at him from across the room, her eyes filled not with remorse, but with a burning, impotent hatred. She still didn't believe she had done anything wrong. She only regretted getting caught. Leo didn't feel triumph in that moment, only a quiet, somber finality. He had not sought revenge for the pleasure of it, but for the necessity of it. He had to tear down the old, rotten structure to build something new and clean. He did not embrace the life of a multimillionaire. The world of high finance and lavish spending held no appeal for him. It was the world that had corrupted Clara and had nearly destroyed him. He sold off the majority of the assets, the stocks, the bonds, the international properties. He kept only two things, the house he had built and a significant portion of the capital for a new purpose. With the help of Mr. Thompson, he established the Vance Foundation, a charitable organization with a simple, direct mission to provide financial and legal support for single parents and to help reunite families separated by circumstance or deception. He named Maria Flores, Sam's mother, to the board of directors. She had a quiet strength and a deep understanding of the struggles he hoped to alleviate. Leo's new life was not defined by wealth, but by purpose. His days were no longer filled with the clang of hammers and the scent of sawdust, but with the quiet hum of the Foundation's office. He found a different kind of satisfaction in reviewing grant applications, in knowing that a small piece of his grandfather's fortune was now helping a mother keep her home or allowing a father to afford the legal fees to see his child. His relationship with Sam was a slow, delicate bloom. The boy was hesitant at first, conditioned by years of a life lived in the shadows. But Leo was patient. He did not try to buy his son's affection with expensive gifts. Instead, he gave him his time. He taught Sam how to use a hammer, how to properly measure a piece of wood. They started with a simple birdhouse, their hands working together. In the shared focus of creation, a bond began to form. Leo would tell Sam stories about his own father and about the quiet, stern grandfather who had, in his own distant way, given them this second chance. Maria was a constant, gentle presence. There was no grand cinematic romance between her and Leo. Instead, there was something deeper and more real, a shared history, a mutual respect, and a deep, abiding love for their son. They were building a new kind of family, one founded not on lies and ambition, but on honesty and quiet care. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a year after the trial, Leo and Sam were in the backyard. They were putting the finishing touches on a small wooden go-kart they had built together. Sam, now a confident and happy 6-year-old, was carefully painting a red racing stripe on the side. Maria came out of the house with a tray of lemonade, a warm smile on her face as she watched them. The backyard, once a place of lonely labor for a woman who didn't love him, was now filled with the sound of a child's laughter. Leo looked at his son, his face smeared with red paint, his eyes, so like his own, shining with pride. He looked at Maria, her presence a comforting warmth. He looked at the home he had reclaimed, now filled with love and light. He realized then that true wealth was never about the numbers in a bank account. It was not measured in dollars or in the value of a stock portfolio. True wealth was the solid weight of a tool in your hand, the shared smile with your son, the quiet comfort of a family built on truth. Clara and her family had been obsessed with the illusion of power, with the trappings of status. But in their frantic pursuit of a life they felt they deserved, they had lost their humanity. They had mistaken money for worth. True power, Leo understood now, lay not in what you could take from the world, but in what you could build. It was in the strength to endure, the courage to seek the truth, and the wisdom to use your victory not for vengeance, but for good. His fortune was not the money he had inherited, it was the life he was now free to live, and it was priceless.